All this talk must be confusing for a lot of people at home about the state of Victoria, New South Wales losing their AAA credit ratings. Is that such a bad thing in the long run, given what the states have had to do?
Yeah, Pete, good morning. That's exactly the question. Now, we should say, of course, that Moody's have retained the AAA credit ratings, but S&P Global downgrading both New South Wales and Victoria. Look, no, this is the result. So, like everything, you look at the process, not the outcome. The outcome, of course, is that we've lost those AAA credit ratings. On the flip side, what was the alternative? Was to have a worse economic outcome for the citizens of those states and retain that AAA credit rating. And it's one of those things where we need to be careful not to put the arbitrary kind of, picture or award on a wall and lose the actual issue itself. So right now they're spending a lot of money, going to a lot of debt to fix and maintain economies, infrastructure spending in particular. The only thing I think is worth noting is that S&P, yes, they talked about the debt burden. That is real. And we know that's probably going to be generational debt, both at state and federal level. The bigger concern probably is the weak outlook, to use S&P's term. And I think that is the key question for all of us. The RBA, the federal and state governments, is how do we make sure the economy gets back to life as quickly as possible? We know the recovery is underway. That's really positive. But S&P pretty much saying, look, yes, there's a lot of debt, but we don't see the recovery being particularly strong. And so that's probably the second part of why we've had a credit downgrade in those two states. And worth just thinking about how do we make sure, without taking on more debt, that is the hard part, of course, is you take on debt to try and stimulate the economy. On the other hand, if we're not getting the growth we had hoped for, then you don't want to get caught between those two outcomes.
So how difficult can it be for it to go the other way, to regain that AAA credit rating? And I suppose now the question is too whether the federal government is going to end up following suit.
Yeah, the federal government question is a real one. I'll address the first question first. Look, it can be tough to regain. It's like all of those things, it's easy to take stuff off. It's harder to give it back. There's always risk. Yeah. And so if you're a ratings agency, you say, well, things could go badly, so maybe we'll hold off upgrading. It's one of those. It's a bit like the Australian cricket team. They say it's harder to get out than get in. It's a bit the reverse with the credit rating. It's harder to get it back once you lose it, even though we'd held it in New South Wales case for 3 decades apparently. So this is a tough one to get back. But as I said, it's not super relevant other than for bragging rights. At a federal government level, to your question, that is probably the next cab off the rank, and I think we should expect that the rating will come under significant pressure. Whether we lose it or not, it's probably a toss of a coin. Remembering, of course, the US lost theirs in the GFC and didn't have any trouble with it. So again, we shouldn't be too worried about it. We like the pride, we like the bragging rights. What's far more important is the government does the right things the right way to get the economy back on track. The ratings agencies' thoughts on that, the outcome, are interesting and are somewhat important in terms of cost of funding. But, man, yields are so low right now, a ratings downgrade simply doesn't have the impact it used to.
What about the ride that iron ore is on at the moment? Really keeping us in the game, isn't it?
Wow. And this, the flip side of that from a federal budget perspective, gee, that's good news, isn't it? $145 a tonne for iron ore. Remembering, of course, the big guys get it out of the ground for about $15 to $20 a tonne. That is some phenomenal profit margin. And as you say, really keeping us in the game economically, keeping jobs rolling, keeping GDP growing, and of course, keeping the federal government budget position in a more decent position than it otherwise might have been. As somewhat of a contrarian, or at least someone who wants to look on the other side of things, it does worry me a little bit. When you're mining a commodity and you're getting a profit of $120 a tonne on something that costs you $15, $20 to get out of the ground, that does worry me a little bit. If you're a shareholder in, say, Fortescue, that's hitting record high after record high at the moment, I'd be a little bit nervous that we might see things go the other way as supply and demand normalises. But gee, it's hard. I'm not going to criticise anyone who's enjoying the fruits of their long-term investments.
It's going to keep going for at least the next 6 months or so, right?
Well, it seems to be, and the imbalance is the key story here. The economic recovery is happening despite continued outbreaks around North America and Europe. The economic recovery seems well and truly underway globally, not just here at home. And there is no sign, as you say, that's going to stop anytime soon.